Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Cocoa supply could finally outstrip demand for the first time in 3 years. But the price of chocolate won't come down anytime soon.
The biggest concern continues to be around the cocoa crop. Some of the export numbers that have come out have improved. But man, that cocoa price continues to be relatively pesky.
Farmers in Ghana and Ivory Coast are yet to see the benefits of last year's record high prices, and it could take some time for the market to rebound.
Obviously, we'll do better this year than the previous year, although it will still not be close to our best.
On today's podcast, we'll look at what's been the impact of cocoa's rapidly rising price in West Africa and whether the region can hold on to its more than two-thirds share of global production. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja, and this is the Next Africa podcast, bringing you one story each week from the continent, driving the future of global growth with the context only Bloomberg can provide. Joining me today is Bloomberg Soft Commodities reporter, that is Mumbi Gitau. Mumbi, thanks so much for joining us. We always love to have you on the show. Let's just start with the price of cocoa. It hit some pretty big highs at the end of 2024. What's happened in the months since then?
At the time, we were concerned about supply. We had started the main season on a very good note, but then concerns started to emerge that supply at the tail end will not be that good, and that's why prices hit those highs. But then again, when we got to January, February, and March, we started to look at demand, and as much as the cost of cocoa is an aspect of supply, we had concerns about demand. Companies were reporting that consumers are buying less chocolate. Companies themselves were buying less cocoa. So there was an aspect of demand, and that's what brought prices to the level that we are seeing right now, which is about $8,000 a ton.
So, Mumbi, you were just touching on the supply factor when it comes to cocoa. You touched on what was behind it, but how have we seen chocolatiers more broadly responding to it based on your reporting?
It's been a shock to the system, to them. One thing we need to understand is that they were used to really cheap chocolate. For so many years, chocolate really never exceeded $2,000 a ton, and now they're confronting prices that are either 3 times or 4 times that. So the first thing has been to raise chocolate prices. Those that have not been able to raise chocolate prices as much have collapsed. We did a story a couple of weeks ago about chocolatiers in Europe that have been forced to fold. Now, those that are able to raise chocolate prices, they've done that. But also something else they're doing is that they're providing consumers with more options, maybe caramel, maybe more nuts in your chocolate, maybe using even less cocoa. So that's really brought down demand for consumers and even for the physical market. Something else they've also had to contend with is reduced margins, and that's showing in their reporting, in their earnings, that they're selling less chocolate globally. So it's a really tough time for chocolatiers, and that's part of the reason why we are seeing cocoa prices come down just a bit, because then if there's no demand for cocoa, if there's no demand for chocolate, then prices have to come down. And they say the cure for high prices is really high prices. So we've had prices come down, but they are still at historically high levels.
And when we look at the harvest this year, is it safe to say that the recovery is making its way, or is this in the past, a lot of the deterioration that we saw a few years back, or where is the recovery at for the cocoa industry?
So as I mentioned earlier, the season started off really well. We had a very good start of the season. The first 3 months were really good, and we started to see that recovery set in. But then we have climate change issues. We have diseases that are ravaging crops in West Africa, particularly Ivory Coast and Ghana. And so we are not seeing a strong recovery in terms of supply. So part of that surplus that we are seeing is because of demand coming off. When you have less demand, then you have a much bigger supply, but it's really not a consequence of production recovering to levels that we saw in the 2021 season or previously. Ivory Coast itself used to produce more than 2 million tons a season. Now it's barely doing 1.9 this season. So it's not a strong recovery, just that demand is coming off quite a bit.
Stick with us, Mumbi. As we mentioned, you just returned from a trip to both the Ivory Coast and Ghana. You have some on-the-ground reporting for us. So we're going to take a look at what you were able to get on the ground and also the impact of the rising price and what that's meant for farmers that are in West Africa. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today, we're looking at cocoa and how West African cocoa production is slowly starting to recover from years of bad harvests. We have our soft commodities reporter, Mumbi Gitau, with us. Mumbi, I'm very jealous that you just returned from a trip to West Africa, to Ghana and Ivory Coast. You were talking about the state of the harvest there. Can you dig into what you saw when you went there and what some of the people on the ground actually told you about how things have changed?
I did travel to Ghana and Ivory Coast, and I have to say that I was on the road for 2 weeks and I covered nearly 3,000 kilometers while I was in the two countries. So that really gave me an opportunity to traverse very many cocoa farms in the main producing regions. And what I saw is the impact of climate change on cocoa farms. Now, they had a rainy period, but then rain stopped in November, and up to March, they've not seen rains. So as you drive through the cocoa plantations, you're seeing trees that are really stressed out. There are barely any pods on the trees. The pods are what mature, and then they're harvested and they give us the cocoa beans that are sold on the futures market. So you're really seeing trees that are stressed out, and that gives you an indication that the tail end of this crop will not be that good. So West Africa is really suffering from climate change at this moment.
What did they tell you? What did some of these farmers talk to you about, Mumbi? What were some of the things that stuck out to you?
What really stuck out for me is initially they used to be able to predict what the weather will be. But now they have no ability to say, okay, the rains will stop in November. And that's one thing that they do not have any control on. It's a variable that they just watch consume their farms. Something like diseases, they're able maybe to spray pesticides or chemicals. But with something like climate change, that's something that's beyond them. And some of them are thinking of, maybe I should shift to another commodity. Maybe I should plant more plantain. Maybe I should shift to rubber and palm oil. So farmers are starting to have that conversation about maybe even replanting seedlings that are more resilient to climate change, seedlings that are more resilient to hot weather, because it's becoming really hot and dry in Ghana and Ivory Coast.
To that point, Mumbi, Ghana's new government has tried to sort out some of the problems that they have had with cocoa historically. Have any of their efforts worked yet? I mean, it sounds like it hasn't exactly reached the farmers, but what has it done potentially to production more broadly?
So we had a new government in Ghana, and now they're trying to overhaul the system. It's going to really take a long time before that impact is felt by farmers. We have a regulator that is debt-ridden. They're looking at a debt of $2 billion that they need to sort out. In some way, it's the farmer that's going to end up paying for that debt. So until that debt is cleared, then the farmer may continue to struggle and may not even see the benefits of the high prices. The other thing is that they have rolled over contracts. Imagine if you sold a car at 2,000 forward and you said you'd deliver it this year in December, but you sold it last year, and then prices shoot up and they hit 10,000, you have committed to sell that car at 2,000. So now we have farmers or the regulator in Ghana that committed to sell cocoa at really cheap prices. And now even though prices have rallied so much, they have to honor those contracts. And it's sad because prices have come down quite a bit. So even though they sell forward for the next crop, it's still not as high as we saw prices at the start of last year and at the end of this year.
Is that part of the frustration that you heard from the CEO of the Ghana Cocoa Board? I know you were speaking to him. Did he express any frustration in some of those contracts that you're talking about?
We spoke to the new Cocoa Board CEO, Dr. Randy Abe. And he said, yes, everyone is saying that we should be paying farmers more money. It's true. He said it is true. But then what do? We have debts that we need to honor. We have contracts that we need to fulfill. And if we promised to fulfill a contract at $2,600 a ton, how can you go back on that word? You have the same buyers, you have the same traders, you have a relationship with these traders. So until they're able to work through those contracts, then farmers will continue to earn what they're earning right now.
We are dealing with a rollover of 333,767 tons. So that is perhaps close to maybe 70% of last year's total yield. That is just wiping everything off. And these are contracts that were signed at 2,600. And so if your forward sale for 24-25 is 6,600, it means that for every ton of 24-25 that you used to service 23-24, you're losing $4,000.
And also remember, they've raised prices for farmers. So they also even have to top up what they're paying farmers and what the traders have to get at the end of the day.
And then there's the added element of smuggling, which we have seen. I mean, when it comes to artisanal mining, at least we have seen that really be a concern, at least for the mining industry on the continent. How big of a concern is it for the cocoa industry?
Illegal mining is a huge concern. I was traveling to a place called Enchi in Ghana, which is about 600 kilometers from the capital. And as we drove through, you could see really chunks of land that have been taken over by illegal mining that are really encroaching on cocoa farms. And to be honest, the chemicals that they use for this illegal mining have a huge impact on production. So you can see the trees next to the illegal miners start to wither or just look like they're emaciated. And soon enough, that farmer will be forced to either give up their land, sell their land, or give up cocoa farming as a whole. So that's a really big issue for the country. And the government is trying to crack down on illegal mining, but it's really going to take some time before we reclaim those pieces of land.
Yeah. And I mean, just speaking from here in South Africa, each government is sort of struggling with how to respond to this, depending on where you're looking. Mumbi, before we let you go, there's a lot of factors here that you said could really determine the outlook for cocoa moving forward, at least the price. What is it that you're watching, though, over the next few months as the year goes on?
We will continue to keep an eye on Ghana and Ivory Coast and how production and harvest there fare, but also we'll keep an eye on chocolate companies and how much they continue to buy cocoa, because then the price is really dictated by both elements, supply and demand. So we'll continue to focus on how much production is coming out of Ivory Coast and Ghana and how much chocolate companies are able to still continue producing chocolate at these really high levels.
And Mumbi, I always ask you, but how's your chocolate intake going?
I really wish I wasn't covering cocoa because since I started this, now I'm a lover of dark chocolate. And I think I'm one of those consumers that's considering pulling back because every time I go to the shelf, I'm like, why is my chocolate getting expensive every single day? But I'm a lover of chocolate now, so no one can take that away from me.
And thanks again so much to Mumbi Gitau, Bloomberg Soft Commodities reporter, for joining us this week. Here's some of the other stories we've been following across the region this week. Kenya failed to meet key benchmarks in its final review under an International Monetary Fund program, forfeiting a disbursement of about $850 million, according to people familiar with the matter. The East African nation didn't adhere to tax revenue thresholds, resulting in a breach of its fiscal deficit ceiling agreed with the lender under the 4-year program, said the people who asked not to be identified because the information isn't public. And South Africa, facing the prospect of ArcelorMittal closing 2 steel mills crucial to the local manufacturing industry, has begun a review of import tariffs on the metals and is proposing other methods of protecting the industry. The review comes as the government is locked in talks with the local unit of ArcelorMittal, which has said it plans to close down 2 mills producing products that are crucial for the local automotive, mining equipment, and construction industries. Among its complaints is a flood of cheap imported steel from China. And you can follow these stories across Bloomberg, including the Next Africa newsletter. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. This program was produced by Adrian Bradley. Don't forget to follow and review this show wherever you usually get your podcasts. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja. Thanks as always for listening.